Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Northland Sports Page. Yes, we're live. The old-fashioned Wayne's World, don't say 2 or 1 on the countdown, but we are live, but not for you, the viewing and listening audience. Still getting used to the viewing piece, but that's the new normal. Welcome to the Northland Sports Page. Happy Saturday. Brian Prudhomme, Dave Cook, Topher Davis. We're all here. We continue to be therapeutic for ourselves, but hopefully for everybody. Hopefully everybody is continuing to cope as best they can with COVID-19. Let's just start with that, fellas. I'll leave it as an open forum. Whoever can jump in first, feel free. What are you guys doing to pass the time as the quarantine era continues for us?
Well, Toph, I don't know about you, but one of the things that has become more and more part of the everyday life is things like this. The Google Hangouts, the Zoom videos, we're creating videos for work all the time now. And so it's been a lot of time spent in this room, in this chair, on that device over the past week.
Yeah, I think for me too. I know that I'm one of the few that's able to continue working through this, so that's been kind of nice because it's keeping some regularity. And I was able to work from home a little bit before as well, so that hasn't changed a ton. But the video meetings is definitely happening a lot more, and that's something to switch into and try to get that going. So that's been the biggest adjustment I think so far.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I kind of wonder how long is it going to be until we replace I'll call you later or I'll text you later with I'll Zoom you later, or I'll Google Hangout you later, because that's, again, part of the new normal too. Topher, I want to ask a question specifically to you because you are in a little different scenario in that you're quarantined by yourself. You have a significant other that does not live with you. I don't know if that's advantageous because I know you've talked to me about you guys have watched shows on Netflix together before. So I've always been a little curious how you guys do that. Is this a little bit of old hat for you because you're doing virtual watching with people already?
I guess a little bit, just because I've done it before. Certainly, it's better if we were together. That's certainly the ideal. That's the not knowing how long this whole thing's going to last is certainly a difficult part of that as well. But yeah, being able to watch, we watched an episode of a show last night on Netflix together. It's just starting at the same time, stuff like that. They also have this thing in Google Chrome called Netflix Watch Party, where you can watch Netflix and it has a little chat bar next to it, and you can interact with each other while watching the same thing on Netflix. So there's ways to make it seem like you're closer than you really are. So that's helpful for sure.
I think that it's been most interesting watching Tiger King 1 and 2 with the kids. Getting a chance to go watch Elton John sing again, and Simba and Timon and Pumbaa and the whole group.
Okay.
Did you say Lion King or Tiger King?
You said it. Yeah, I was gonna say you lost me a little bit on that bit because you mentioned Tiger King 1 and 2, which to me meant you were 2 episodes into the entire series. But then you went off on the. But okay, so you're thinking Lion King.
Oh, dang it!
All right,
coming up Dave, I'm all in Detroit. I got the wrong sport.
All right, so Dave went out of his way to prove that it is indeed the year of the cat. But yes, I was going to talk about Tiger King because there is a new episode out tomorrow, and I didn't know if Dave was into that at all or how far into Tiger King he has gotten, if he's taken the plunge, because Topher just mentioned the Netflix watching together. I'm more than willing to watch the newest and rumored to be last Tiger King episode with each of you. But if Dave can't decipher between lions and tigers and bears, oh my, maybe we're back to square one.
It's been one of my, because you guys know how much TV I watch. It's been one of my favorite conversations with people. Have you seen the Tiger King? Oh, I love the Tiger King. I'm an Elton John fan. And you get the blank look all the time. Like, huh? What?
Topher, do you ever get the feeling that we do a show with maybe the real life common man?
Something, yeah. It's always hard to tell how much Dave's trying to reel us in or not. I love it.
I think that's the bit. I think I've either fallen for it many, many times, or the Ronnie Rodriguez is more unintentional than you might believe.
I think by now you're eye rolling, so that's all right.
That makes it a show, though. We're only 4 minutes in, and we're back in mid-season form. Speaking of mid-season, we're just hoping for starts of seasons. Before we go into the topics that we've outlined that we were going to do today for more COVID-19 relief, at least in the mental health format of things, what do you guys think of the latest baseball attempts to get games going? I would be somewhat for it because it's baseball and I'm having withdrawals pretty bad. But the logic behind it doesn't seem that great. I just don't see it happening. Started with the whole Arizona only, biosphere, for lack of a better phrase, talk at the beginning of the week. And then it was basically, well, let's realign baseball and let's do spring training as a real season. I just don't see this, guys. I'd like to because I love baseball, but I just don't see it. I'll let you guys jump in with takes.
I think that ESPN and Fox and all of them are probably leaning like crazy on Major League Baseball to get going, or to at least give them an idea of what they're planning. And so it wouldn't surprise me if we see some semblance of one of those two, either the All Arizona League or National League plays in, Arizona, and the American League plays in Florida, until we get to, the point where we can get back into our stadiums.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I know that it seems like there's the possibility it could work. I still feel like there's a lot that needs to get figured out. I mean, if you're asking players to be separated completely from their families for 4 months, I think you're going to get some pushback from some players. I know Mike Trout's expecting a baby in the next couple months. I can't imagine he's pumped to not be able to be there to see a birth of his child. And also, just beyond that factor, what about, the COVID-19 still a situation, even if you totally isolate everybody, if somehow it gets in there and one player gets infected, do we shut it all down completely again? Do you have to quarantine a team and they forfeit their games? I mean, there's so many questions about what everything would happen as long as that stuff's still floating around.
It does sound like the South Korean Baseball League is starting to get rolling, doing something similar, putting the teams pretty separate from each other during their spring training, getting ready for the season. So I don't think I don't think we'll be making it up. I think there will be a template to follow. We'll just see if it works for them.
Well, and I'm curious, like Topher said, is it going to work for the players? Because if this gets voted on as it should by everybody, just like, the NFL's recent bargaining agreement that, passed by the hair on its chin, I just can't see players going for this. There isn't the dire need for a paycheck, I don't think. There shouldn't be. There's more money than I'll ever see with even the league minimums. But there is the desire for normalcy. But I don't think we're getting there because that's not playing it as normal in one state, in two states, in one stadium, what have you. It's not sports as we know it.
No, but I think what you said to start this whole conversation is what's going to drive it, and that is there is a pent-up demand for it. And so tell me you won't sit down and watch it and enjoy it. I mean, you might say this is different, this is strange, but I think that's a conversation we can have as well. This is kind of a reset button. So if you're Major League Baseball and you feel the pressure and you succumb to the pressure to play, if you have the opportunity to reset some of the things that you do, I mean, is this the time to throw in the electronic umpires because you don't want home plate umpires close to catchers? Do catchers need a spit guard on their face? So on a slide at home plate, there's all kinds of COVID-19 things that you could implement into baseball now.
I wouldn't want to be a first baseman in the bit. I'll tell you what, the first guy to reach base, I'd be like, take a bigger lead, please. You're too close to me. I just don't think, I just don't think, and again, friend of show Jim Suhan wrote about this. I just don't think lives at risk is going to be worth, the attempt at normalcy or the need for the almighty dollar, because I just look at it as it's not that unlike different states that have, scaled back on their social distancing requirements. And then they've seen spikes in COVID-19. And then you got to go back to basics and you're kind of back to square one.
Yeah.
Basketball made us aware of this. When Rudy Gobert got tested positive, NBA shut down and the sports world followed. What if baseball was responsible for firing this back up because they tried to be normal?
Well, and some of the things about baseball is their managers, their coaches tend to be older ball players. I mean, think back to Wayne Twilliger back in the Twins' glory days in the 80s and the 90s. He would have been prime candidate. Now imagine if you did get COVID circling through a clubhouse. I mean, who's it's going to attack first, right? It's going to go right after the older. So Gardenhire would be at risk as somebody who's not been crazy healthy, and it's pushing 70.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, who it would go after. And when Dave was talking about potential rule changes that this could maybe bring in or things like that, I know that there's been, pictures of like some of the Korean leagues or something like that, the players wearing masks on the field and stuff like that, and whether that's going to become something that happens. But I also came up, and it's not really COVID-19 related, but if they go forward with some of these ideas, for example, like a cactus league and a grapefruit league, where you're having instead of American and National, is it the time when Major League Baseball just gets rid of the DH completely, because at that time you're already having American League and National teams mixed together?
Well, I would do the reverse. I wouldn't
I
get rid
would
of
as
it
well.
altogether. I would implement it universally. I would
Yep.
say,
Right.
pitchers are
That's
neat.
what.
If you're watching Mad Bum go yard, it's neat. But otherwise, you're getting gift sacrifice bunts with one out. You're getting one guy in the lineup every day that's hitting $130 if they're doing well. We could turn that into a completely different argument of if you're for or against the DH. Offense, we can't
Right,
say
and
it sells
that's
tickets
what I meant.
anymore.
What I said. That's what I meant when I was going at it. But I think I might have revealed how I feel about the DH when I talked about it.
Well, he's a National League guy. I'm a little shocked it's still a Twins hat. I'm sure by the next show it'll be a Mets hat, or maybe by the second hour today. We'll see. But it's interesting because it's offense sells tickets, where there are no tickets to be sold anymore. I would say that the strangest thing that I've heard, I don't know if you guys caught this or not, but because of the social distancing with even an attempt at baseball, there's rumor that they wouldn't even sit together in the dugout. They would sit 6 feet apart in empty stands. Can you imagine the on deck batter coming down from row 3 to take his hacks?
That would be kind of interesting. Yeah, all the way your cleanup hitters in the right field corner.
Is warming up in the bullpen the safest place you can be? At least when you're throwing, you're 60 feet 6 inches from the catcher. But if you're double barrel, you're right next to the other guy. I mean, these are all tongue in cheek ideas, but to me, that's why
It's
this
all
shouldn't
true.
be. Yeah, it's exactly right. I love
Right,
baseball. I want baseball, but not this way.
Right, and how many players spit in their glove, and how many guys lick their hands, and stuff like that too. And so I don't know. I don't think it's I don't think it's time yet.
And some super pitcher with high end ingenuity is going to figure out how to throw the hand sanitizer ball. Cleaning the hand with the hand sanitizer, but you don't get it all the way off.
And if you've looked
all
on
kinds of funky things.
If you've looked on Twitter at all, hands down, it's going to be Trevor Bauer. That guy is way too analytical. He's going to figure it out first.
Yeah, him or Rich Hill, because Rich Hill just wants to pitch.
Exactly, and by the time baseball gets started now, he's probably going to be good to go. I mean,
Yep,
there are upsides to this if you want to find it. Anybody who was going to begin the season on an injured list is probably going to have 2-3 months to recuperate and be good to go. There still is the weirdness of the suspensions, depending upon how much is played and how long the suspension is. It may be served, it may not be served. Again, the Houston Astros could come out of this smelling like a rose for a multitude of reasons. The suspensions may not hold if we don't have baseball this year. And then there's just the, human nature to have a heart. We're going to be so happy to have the sport. We're going to forget how much venom we had at the Astros, a month ago.
Yeah, they're probably the one team who's benefiting more from other things being on the front page of the newspaper and the Athletic and online than any other team, because they would be front and center still probably. And,
and I've got
they're not at all.
Yeah, and one other thing like that. Remember, right before this was all coming out, the hammer was going to drop on the Red Sox any day, and excuse me, we still haven't heard anything more on the Boston Red Sox. What are they going to wait until this whole thing passes and then all of a sudden reinvigorate this thing, or does Major League Baseball try to slide it in, quietly and under the auspices of this whole COVID-19 thing? That's still hanging out there.
Well, what they're going to do is they're going to wait until baseball doesn't get played this year, so this year's transactions don't count either. So therefore, Mookie Betts never got traded. He's going to be a Red Sox, and then you put the hammer down when they thought they might still have a good team. There you go.
That would be awful, Brian. That would be awful.
But it's possible. So without a doubt, COVID-19 is, if it wasn't already, rapidly becoming our least favorite 19. But big time credit to Dave for a fun little opening topic today. Trying to be positive, trying to be therapeutic. Again, this show continues to be both of those things for me. I love talking to both of you. Hopefully we're reaching a good listening and viewing audience out there too. So let's focus on some good 19s. And sports is all about numbers. And we can do it different ways. We can do guys that wore jersey number 19. That's going to be the easiest way to do it. If you had a 19-game winner that you loved, if you had a 19-goal scorer that you loved, have at it. But jersey number 19 is the easiest way to go. We can do this sport by sport. Hockey's going to have the majority of them. Football, we can think of one. By the way, did you know that he went to Detroit Lakes? But there are some others too. But, let's have some fun with this. Who are 19s that you'd be happy to see once COVID-19 is not something that's forced in your face?
Steely Dan. Steely Dan has the greatest
Hey,
19
hey,
ever.
19.
Hey, 19.
I see what you
Sorry.
did there, Dave.
That was
a
totally
good one.
off sport. I apologize. Go
No,
ahead.
it's
Let's
perfect.
have a
I expected you to go Brian Setzer +2 because we did Sexy and 17 last week. So, there are ways to do it. That counts if you've got 19 songs. That works too. We can open this up to anything. But the very first one that I thought of was Stevie Y, and I'm not even a Red Wings guy. But when I think of 19, I think of Steve Yzerman right away. It might be because of the North Stars Red Wings days. I'll be real honest. It might be because of my Nintendo and Sega Genesis NHL playing days. If you had Steve Yzerman, you were going to be pretty darn good. But he was a solid 19, obviously.
My very first thought was Scott Erickson. And I know there's all kinds of better players that had 19, did a little bit of looking around, and all kinds of better players. My first 19 was Scott Erickson.
I think that's probably the best local one. So if you go current, obviously Adam Thielen is the best local one, but Scott Erickson popped up for me. Dave loves when I pull obscure twins out. So I'll go. I remember Mark Portugal wearing number 19.
Yeah, Portugal, the 1 year wonder.
There you go. I tell you what, when you mentioned which 19 I'd like to see most, like when this comes out, that's Luke Cunnin, because that means we're back playing hockey again, and the Wild are making a little bit of a run, hopefully, towards the playoffs. So I'm still crossing my fingers, and I also think Luke Cunnin has got a possibility to become the best local 19 in the next couple of years. No offense to Adam Thielen, but I think he's a player that's on the come.
Wow, it's a bold statement.
He might be the next Wild captain. How about that?
I totally agree.
Well, what about Chris Locker? I figured he'd be the first one you'd want to see when this is over. You know the conversations he loves to have with us. He wore a couple of different numbers in high school. I think he wore 28 or 29 1 year also, but I know he definitely wore 19. So he's probably one of the few people that we know are going to watch this. So I got to throw that out there.
Well, and it's good. Chris Locker wore his changed his number so teams couldn't figure out which one he was. I mean, let's be honest. Chris is kind of a strategist when it comes to that sort of thing.
Absolutely. You talked about the 1 year wonder of Mark Portugal. I got another 1 year wonder for the Twins for you. What about Danny Valencia? He was a 19 that we thought was going to solve the hot corner problem, and he did for about half a season.
Danny Valencia. That's a crazy pull. Yeah, I remember when he was going to be the guy, and after about 3 months, we were like, all right, so back to the drawing board at third base.
Well, how many times have we said that? Back to the drawing board at third base. Spoiler alert, in hour number 2 today, we're going to do a fantasy draft, so we'll each have our all-time Twins teams. I'm real curious, if you don't get Harmon Killebrew and deal with his defensive issues at third, who are you going with? Now, there are names to follow up with easily, but most of them played a while ago. Third base has not been a great position for the Twins in the years 19 whatever. How's that for a 19 tie-in?
That's very true. Our draft is going to have two great big caveats. One is going to be where Harmon plays, and two, do we count the Washington Senators of old?
Oh, that's
I would say no for that. I don't want Sam Rice to go number 1.
Big train.
Or Walter Johnson to go number 1. Yeah.
Joe Cronin would be your shortstop. Anyway, I got us off track.
No, but I think it is going to be interesting. We'll continue with spoiler alerts for hour number 2, because do we have to make rules where when you draft somebody, you have to declare where you're going to play them too? Because, you look at Rodney and you go, well, there's your second baseman. Well, how much second base did he play for the Twins? Not a ton.
Yeah, that's true. I can't wait to get into the Twins conversation, because there's a take on Calvin Griffith and whether or not he knew he was good at trading guys when they fell off the cliff, and Carew is guy number 1 for that.
So what about Toph? What about UMD Bulldog 19s? I could be dead wrong, but didn't they just lose one? Was Mr. Richards number 19?
Justin Richards was number 19, and he probably would have been the UMD's captain next year if he sticks around for one more season. But he is off to the New York Rangers organization. But yeah, jersey number 19, Justin Richards is a very good one there for the UMD Bulldogs.
My favorite
a couple other.
My favorite one. It's Hobey Baker Award Day tonight. My favorite 19 is a Hobey winner. I loved Chris Marinucci.
Yeah, Marinucci.
Loved him.
Yep.
He got it the year after Derek should have. Hobey Baker tonight. I'll be upset if Scott Prudhomme doesn't win. It'll probably be the most upset I've been at a Hobey announcement since Paul Correa won it and Derek Plant didn't. And Paul Correa was phenomenal. They didn't exactly get it wrong. I just couldn't believe that our guy, Derek Plant, didn't get it that year.
I agree, and if you go look at the numbers, I think there's a very good case for Derek to have won it that year. Obviously, we're a little biased here, but if you look at the big picture, Paul Kariya obviously went on to have a little bit better professional career than Derek, and Derek had a pretty good professional run. But Paul Kariya is a name that everybody knows, so it's easy to look back now. But at that one season in college, I think Derek was right up there.
Well, I think the most shocking part, and Dave, I'll bring you back in here. I don't want to get completely off topic, but what's crazy to me is you think of the Hobey, and we're such college hockey fans in this state, in this region, and you think of it historically almost like you do the Heisman because it's college hockey's equivalent to it. But then you look at the Hobey, and it's only been around since 1981. There haven't been a ton of these. Heisman guys, you can go back 100 years just about. I mean, not quite, but you know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I do. The Hobey is quite interesting too, because it's sort of like when you read and hear about stories on the Miracle on Ice and how there was this component of East Coast players and this component of Midwest players, and they didn't really get along. And so you see the Hobey votes often go that way. Korea is a great example. The main guy got all the East Coast votes. Plant got all the West votes, and it was just more East Coast votes. I thought that was going to be Jack Conley's undoing, and yet he still won it his year.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. You're absolutely right about how that plays out, and I know that Dave obviously enjoys Hobey history because the first few years were, good for his Gophers. But you're right.
Yeah, that Broughton character was okay. That Broughton guy was okay. And don't forget,
was pretty good.
Don't forget the loose own turn gopher, Rob Stauber. There aren't that many goalies that have gotten it.
No, there are not a ton of goalies that have won it. There's one up for it this year in the hat trick. Maine's goalie is up, one of the 3 finalists. But I do think Prudhomme should win it. I know we're a little biased again, but just looking at the numbers, and plus, I mean, he's got that. If scouts or anybody watches him play, he's got that it factor. That the eye test is off the charts with Prudhomme.
Yes, he does. So, guys, I don't follow UMD hockey. You know that, but I have 2 questions. One, did Iafallo wear 19 in college or just in the pros? And 2, you guys have lost just a ton of players over the last 2 weeks. Who's captaining UMD next year?
Iafallo was number 14 in college, and I think he was 14 with the Kings as well for a little bit here.
Yeah, he was the last number 14 at UMD ever. Actually.
Right, because Bill Watson's jersey got put up into the rafters, which there was a little bit of debate. We love Bill. There's no question it should have been retired. That's my first favorite Bulldog, to tie it into another Hobey winner. But if you're going to retire his jersey, and they did it on a night where a guy that was still wearing it was out on the ice, that was weird. That's just me. That's, at least Bill has a good attitude about it. He doesn't go after, Josh Burlow like Glenn Taylor and KG would go after each other about jersey retirements, but I digress. We'll probably get into that today too, just a guess. But yeah, when you look at what UMD has lost, in other news, water is wet, to use one of my favorite, theories and statements and cliches, because there's been a lot of years that it's been like that. You think of, the year that they didn't win the national title game when they got into it and Denver beat them. They were losing everybody with Toninato and Adam Johnson and that whole group. There were a ton of seniors plus some early departures. And UMD was going to be, on paper, not that good. And all they did was go out and win another national championship. Now, I think the difference this year, and I'm not counting them out again because you just can't do it. Scott Sandelin has proven that you just can't count his group out. They've got talent. What scares me this time is everybody talks about building a hockey team from the back end out. And your goalie's gone. Your decor, for the most part, has said, see you later, between Wolf, Rail, and now Sandberg, etc. When you lose scoring punch, you usually find a way to replace it because that extra year, they get that much better. You hope your decor can do that. Your goalie is going to be absolutely fresh, brand new. It's going to be more difficult, but I'm going to go to Topher because we're the avid Bulldog fans on this panel, if you will. I'm nervous, but we've been there, done that. So we'll just see.
No, I think you're right, but this year obviously there's going to be a lot of change on the back end this year. Losing Hunter Shepard is going to be a huge difference. I mean, Ben Pat was recently talking about what he wants to do to try to win the job, and it'll be interesting to see who ends up taking that reins because there's literally 0 games played in the goaltenders right now for UMD Bulldogs. But on the defensive side, it feels a lot like you mentioned that 2000. The year they lost to Denver and then they lost Miska and they lost Pionk and they lost a lot of these guys early. They came in that next season with a new goalie, this guy named, Shepard that no one had ever heard of, that's from Rapids. But
wait, I was going to say, can can I contend that their fan base was relaxed about it because they had heard about him? If the fan base puts trust in that wilderness pipeline, you should be excited about Pat as well.
Well, I agree. I agree there. But you know what I mean? No one really knew how good Hunter Shepard was going to be at this next level at that point. And also the defensemen, I think they came in that season with their every defenseman on the roster totaled like 25 games played. And so obviously they're going to be lower again, but they're already above that mark. So I think they've got pretty good idea there. And Scott Sandelin and Coach Herter and Coach Krause we trust because they've been able to get guys going. I did see that Wyatt Kaiser came out and said that he is joining UMD next year from Andover. So that'll be obviously a big addition there as well.
Well, that's a great segue because Dave, I know you won't like to hear this, but UMD with the recency bias has become the gold standard in the state for the programs for recruits to join. So all of a sudden, losing who you had in the cupboard doesn't empty it out because you've got the 5-star recruits coming in. You're expecting more of them in the more immediate sense for sure. But, the star power is headed north. And if you're Scott Sandelin and company, you know what to do with that. So if it continues, life is good.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I don't dislike UMD. I just don't care. Because when growing up, it used to be the University of Saskatchewan South is what the joke for UMD was. And right now, UMD is the place where Minnesota players go to play. And so it's fun. They're fun to watch for that reason. And being around the Hermantown style, which is how I talk about UMD's play style, that super grind, which is kind of fun to watch if they're not playing your team. So yeah, I don't mind watching UMD. I just dislike the little engine that could. We're overcoming everybody when you're like the big dog right now. No pun.
Well, and I think you just fed both points because I think because they're able to overcome this each time, the little engine that could argument is over. But we both started this conversation because all of this, believe it or not, came off of Chris Marinucci wearing number 19. We'll get back to that eventually. But Dave, you said that Topher and my team are losing people by the bucket load. So if you're going to target them for who they lost, they're going to become the little engine that could because look at what they went through. So the opponents now are feeding the argument. I don't believe it anymore either. You don't win on the regular like UMD is doing and be a little engine that could. But if you want to give them a reason to be one, you cooked your own goose.
Okay, hashtag Alabama football who loses both starting wide receivers, their starting tackles, and their starting quarterback, little engine that could.
Right. So if you want to put Scott Sandler and Nick Saban on the same parallel, be my guest. I'm on board.
Honestly, I think you can if you want to compare sports. So yeah, whatever. I don't buy that in the least.
So how about a different angle on favorite 19s to bring it back? Because I'm going to go this way because I started thinking just randomly the other day. Actually, Topher, it was when I texted you because I found a documentary on the 90-91 Minnesota North Stars, which when you look at, favorite North Star teams for me, love Dave's hat today, by the way, it's that group. It's not just the fact that they went to the finals, but it's how they got there. They had to pull upset after upset after upset, and then Super Mario said, yeah, you guys are cute, and that's how it ended. But my favorite 19 is 1991 because so many cool things happened in sports for me on a personal level that year. And it's not me, the athlete, because there's really no such thing outside of a brief wheelchair basketball domination that I don't want to bore people with. But 1991, the Twins won the World Series. The Super Bowl, if I remember correctly, was here. 1991 was the year that my dad took me to Kemper Arena in Kansas City to watch UMD Bulldog basketball play in the NAIA national tournament. 1991 was the first state hockey tournament I ever attended. It was the first time Mike Randolph brought East there, and Rusty Fitzgerald in that group lost to Hill Murray. So when I run out of jersey numbers to worship that are number 19, I think of 19 fill in the blank as my favorite year in sports. Do you guys have one of those?
And Topher, it's an anagram, and he loves those two.
That too. Palindrome or whatever it is. Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, the backwards and forwards thing.
Yeah, something like that. We're backwards and forwards on this show without a doubt.
That's a great question, Brian. 98 was kind of fun because looking back on it now, it was tainted. But 98 was the year that baseball came back with a roar, and it was must watch TV all season long.
As was the Viking
98
season.
was fun.
Yeah.
And then the Vikings were the Cats. Well, I almost did that. Was the Cats behind, and so it was fun. Yeah.
The Cats posterior, Dave Cook.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting to think. I mean, that 91 is tough to beat, obviously, especially locally, in the state of Minnesota with the Stanley Cup Finals, the World Series. The Super Bowl was played in Minneapolis at that time. For me personally, I might be 97 just because it was the year the Dukes won the Northern League Championship, and that was a fun ride for me to be on. I made the Bantam A team as a first year Bantam. For me personally, that was a really big deal. And then it was just it was a fun time, I guess. I don't know. I think that might be it.
Dave, you left out the best part. We know what a hoop junkie Topher is. 1997 was the Final Four that didn't happen. Hello.
No, that too. They too. Yeah, that was the year I actually paid attention to the NCAA basketball tournament.
So two thoughts on Topher's 1997 take. Topher, just in case you're wondering, Aaron was 3 in 1997. Topher's such a kid. He was in bantams.
But Dave, that just proves that Topher is older than someone. I graduated high school in 1997.
The other year is 2 years ago when we had the Super Bowl, the Final Four, the Miracle, all those things were happening. The OMG texts were fun.
So what would you call that though? 19 plus 100 plus?
Yes.
Because you fell out of the 19 theme if you go 2 years ago.
Yep. And we tried that with 19 earlier. We took
or do you go with
minus Laudner?
Yes, we were doing Topher when Dave texted me about this idea to showcase our favorite 19. We were talking about some Twins, and then I think Dave mentioned somebody who didn't wear 19. So I said, well, you can do math to get there. And I said, well, in that case, give me Puckett minus Tim Laudner. And he said, I'm sure the Twins would have taken that deal too. Maybe Tim Laudner was your favorite 19 because those are the 2 digits his batting average started with in 1987.
Yeah, well, and his career has been much better than that. Butch Weiniger too.
There you go. More catchers that are options if you don't get Joe Mauer in our fantasy draft a little bit later today.
Ooh.
All right, so I'll let you guys close the favorite 19s bit because you guys are more the pro hockey fan than I am. I love the sport. You get to the NHL level, I phase out a little. But that is the sport that probably has the most of them.
Yeah.
Dave's got the list, yeah.
I did a little bit of research because you guys are better at numbers than I am. So do you want to have some of these numbers from the different sports first that I've picked out?
Absolutely.
So in baseball, how about Jay Buhner?
Oh, that's a great one. That was one of my favorite unsung Mariners on that big group in '95 that beat the Yankees. But before you get started, Dave, there's one 19 that I expected you to pull that is local because I think, and I don't want to speak for you, he's generally your favorite Minnesota Timberwolf.
Yeah, he's right. He's right there on top.
All right, so
Campbell.
Wow. So but that's another one. But you're missing the one I was referencing.
Oh boy,
Sam Cassell wore 19 with the Wolves.
Oh,
there you go.
I thought Sam wore a low number. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I didn't even look at Sam Cassell.
But Tony Campbell's a great pull. That's a great pull.
Robbie Bordson. Oh no, wait, that's UMD hockey.
There you go.
I thought maybe he just had his Marshall alumni list out.
Yes, no. So my friend who's a Baltimore fan, Chris Davis, wears 19, but Scott Erickson wore 19 for Baltimore as well.
That's correct.
So for the old timers, ready? Rapid Robert, Bob Feller wore 19. Greg Lazinski wore 19. So,
I was going to say that's nice. Tony Oliva wore 6.
Good save. So there is a Milwaukee connection on this.
Robin Yount.
Because Robin Yount wore 19, but Paul Molidor wore 19 for Toronto.
For Toronto, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And why did we not pull out Tony Gwynn?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I was waiting. I was gonna wait for you to finish. I was like, Tony Gwynn's got to be at the top.
No, I think we went on too many tangents. Somehow Chris Marinucci came up, and you threatened Duluth people with hockey, and everything just goes in a direction.
Yeah, well, Tony Gwynn is on the list. I was saving him for last. So hat tip to Brian's mom. One of my favorite pitchers of all time wore 19. Rags, Dave Righetti.
Nice.
And currently, the best 19 might be Joey Votto.
Might be. You guys don't get me started. You guys made fun of me last year when I already talked about how much I like Joey Votto.
That just shows the weakness in number 19 in baseball currently.
Yeah,
What about
because
Josh?
hockey doesn't have a weak system.
What about Josh
So,
Beckett with Boston? Come on, people.
right, we don't. So we kind of cut
No.
Boston out of this because we know you have them
Yeah,
covered.
leave it to the Red Sox fan.
All
Wow.
right, so football. We're gonna finish with John Unitas, right? Because that's everybody says 19 doesn't exist except for Johnny U.
Joe
But
Montana with the Chiefs.
how about Keyshawn?
Yeah, just give him the damn
Yeah,
ball.
Keyshawn.
For Vikings fans who either are going to shudder or are going to laugh, Scott Mitchell for the Lions.
Oh yeah, I thought maybe you were thinking of Viking 19s. I was trying to think if
I
Bobby
have
Wade. I was trying to think if Bobby Wade wore that number or not.
so another old timer one. Topher, you're not going to know this name, but Bob Lee was the backup quarterback for the Vikings. He was also their punter. He was Sean Mannion before Sean Mannion. He was the guy who said, "Oh, Tarkington, stay healthy because if Bob Lee comes in, we're screwed."
Well, see, now that makes sense. Bob Lee is a while back, but when you first said Topher wasn't going to know it because he's an old timer, I figured maybe he played in 2000.
and one that I'll mention that we wanted to kind of avoid, but it is a connection. Tom Dempsey, who has the longest field goal of all time, did have the longest field goal of all time, wore 19 for the New Orleans Saints. But he's also the one that passed because of COVID-19 earlier in the week. But then we get to hockey, right? And there's a ton of big names, but I want to start out with one that I didn't know wore 19, but has had such an impact on hockey equipment and safety, and that's Bill Masterson. For the North Stars way back, he's the guy that fell on the ice and cracked his head open, but he was a superstar at that time back in the 60s. And so the 19s are loaded with Hall of Fame guys. But Masterson might have had as big an impact on hockey as any of these players because of safety issues.
Yeah, no, that's a good pull. I would have that. How Minnesotan of me was that to start a sentence with yeah, no. But that is a great pull. One of those things that you don't want to say you don't recall, but you overlook. And I think
Right.
as you go through this list, I don't know that we necessarily overlooked them as much as again we got on the hockey tangent. It's like, boy, we've been going for half an hour and we only talked about 5 of them because I hope Chris Marinucci is very proud for the number of directions that he got us to go. But yeah, if you can just fire these away, I'm sure it's going to be eye opening for each of us.
All right, so I'm just going to go with the bigger names. So Nicholas Backstrom from the Capitals. So
The other one, yep.
Yep, Shane Doan that played for Arizona and all those different teams. Of course, I had Conan down. But let's go into the big names. Joe Sakic.
Yeah.
I mean,
Not
Sakic
bad.
is okay.
I
He's all right.
want to like him a lot more than I do. It was when the Wild came into being fairly good. The Avs were quickly, for me, their number one rival.
Yep, and still might be.
Might be.
Yeah. Brian Trottier.
Yeah. He was okay.
He was the grit and grind of that Islanders teams back in the 80s. Joe Thornton. I mean, Big Joe.
Jumbo Joe.
He's okay.
Who do you affiliate him with, San Jose or Boston?
See, I still affiliate him with Boston, but probably more people affiliate him with San Jose. Larry Robinson.
Yeah.
The defenseman and the Calgary defenseman way back in the day. So and the Canadian defenseman.
The Canadians, yeah.
Canadians.
Yeah. Yep.
Stevie Y, of course. Stevie Y is probably the greatest of the 19s. Scott Mellenby wore 19. Rick McLeish wore 19. A certain guy named Taves who plays in Chicago right now, he wears 19. And he might make a run at Stevie Y for being the greatest 19 of all time. Our favorite Wild, Stéphane Veilleux, wore 19. And I know that there's locals listening because our guys got us off track earlier. But Butch Williams wore 19 when he first started out. So hockey
was that with the Seals?
No, he was with the Blues when he first started.
Right.
You mean the Seals in Portland? Was that where you were going to?
No, they were the California Seals.
No, I know.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. There's a few great 19s in baseball. There's mainly one great 19 in football. Basketball really wasn't super solid at number 19, but holy cow, when you look at hockey, half the Hall of Fame is wearing number 19.
Right. And you mentioned just one in football. Is it because of what the other one may have done as a 19, because you look at the number change, and the only athlete that I know to change numbers and still continue to dominate is, may he rest, Kobe Bryant. Whether it was 8 or 24, he was pretty good. Some could argue that 23 and 45 of Jordan was still quality, but there was certainly a difference. Dennis Rodman, if you want to list off the 17 different numbers he wore, I guess he was good in all of them. But I still make an argument for Joe Montana with the Chiefs, but you don't, because he was about 1/8 of what he was as a 49er wearing 16.
Yeah, it's tough. That one's tough. I'm sure we could see a number of players that changed uniforms as they changed teams when they got older, and put them into this as well. But I just think it's Johnny U and then probably Keyshawn and everybody else.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's Johnny Hughes with on top of everything, like, with the bullet down on for NFL, because he's easily the number 19, and maybe part of it's because other players see that and they say, I'm not going to wear that because I'm never going to be Johnny. I don't know how much of there's a quiet jersey retirement type thing for some guys too.
That would be an interesting show sometime, Brian, to talk about numbers that are not retired. Who is the one that is the greatest amongst players with that number? So, like, Gretzky is obviously the greatest of all time with 99, but I mean that number's gone. So, I mean, the difference between Jackie Robinson and Mo Vaughn is significant, right? But wondering on jersey numbers that aren't retired.
But if you're going to use the Mo Vaughn Jackie Robinson comparison, Rivera still wore it.
Yeah, that's true. I forgot about Rivera.
That hampers that one too. Yeah,
he's a closer. I forgot about him.
Of course you did.
It'd be interesting to say, who's the greatest number one, right? And then who's second? And since Cam Newton will probably be second, what's the difference, right? So you can go, or maybe Cam's number one and Ozzie Smith is number two. What's the difference? So
what about Billy Martin? Come on, people.
Love Billy Martin.
I know. Can we add a different category where we do the most obscure number or whatever, so I can play too?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Because I'll pull.
I'll just be talking.
Because I'll have.
You and I are sick someday. That's going to be the topic.
Right, because it'll be the only time that Jay Canizero gets mentioned with the Twins again. So
You just did.
Right.
Wasn't Tyner number one?
Who?
Did Tyner wear number one?
Yes, Jason Tyner did. Alex Cole did. Nelson Lariano did. John Moses did.
Alex Cole with the goggles.
I think Otis Nixon was a Twin and obviously stuck with number one, did he not?
Yeah, that's true as well.
See, I'm telling you, we need to start Northland Sports Page. Since we're making all these adjustments to continue our show, we're not on the radio yet due to COVID-19, but we're now hoping to become a YouTube sensation. I still think we need to go Sesame Street on the bit for segments. Today's show is brought to you by number, and you choose one, and the letter, and you choose one. So we pick the greatest or the most obscure with that number, and then we use last names that start with that letter and the greatest or most obscure.
We can do that. I'm good with that, because you and I will have at least one person to say.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Brian will just talk a lot, and then we'll chime in a little bit. So
you can pick the goal. We'll do number one. Topher can pick the goaltender. I'll pick Cam, and then Brian can the rest of the section.
But Topher said that I'll just talk a lot, and then you guys will chime in now and then. If you ask Topher, that's the show format, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what I say. It's like normal.
Guilty as charged.
At the beginning, Topher, Brian's point guard. You and I are just running wing.
I don't know if I'm supposed to apologize or say you're welcome. One of the two.
Depends on if we're scoring, I guess.
Absolutely. How's the offense look today, fellas? That is the question. So here's another question, because when we first started the YouTube shows last week, and we did a couple because we did NCAA's Championship Monday too. When we first started last Saturday, we talked about the gamut of emotions that comes with the COVID-19 situation. Are you sad? Are you depressed? Are you bored? Are you trying to laugh at things that you just can't or maybe normally wouldn't? I thought about the gamut of emotions that sports gives to us too. And maybe we touched on it a little bit when we talked about our favorite years and why. Obviously, I remember being at the state tournament for the first time as a sixth grader. Topher remember making the Bantam team, and that's a big moment. But I'm wondering about the gamut of emotions, and if we can remember this, and we can pick the emotion we want to start with, whether it's joy or sadness or depression, whatever the case may be. Do you remember a sporting event that made you feel any of those to a higher level than maybe you ever had before?
Yeah, I can tell you that You want to do the frustration, anger, whatever. That's the 98 game against Atlanta. That game, I remember just walking away saying, I don't know if I want to watch football again. That's the most disheartening thing I've watched in pretty
And he
much.
hasn't watched football again live, so it did the
No, I
trick. No,
did
that
in
was '09. I
2009.
know. All right, so continue the sadness train or the depression train or the anger train, Topher. What sporting event upset you the most?
I mean, it's hard to get past the 98 one. I'm trying to think of another event that's really, and honestly, part of after some of that, I just try not to get so much into, letting a game affect me that much to provide that, that anger. I still, the joy is, I mean, that one's easy. That's still 2011. The national championship for the UMD Bulldogs. That one's never going to get topped, I don't think, in my lifetime. And until the day the Minnesota Wild bring a Stanley Cup to the state of Minnesota, which who knows that'll ever happen. The Bulldogs national championship is never going to get topped.
So, Toph, which one happens first? Do we get a Wild Stanley Cup or do we get a Viking Super Bowl?
It's a tough one. I think, honestly, I would say probably the Super Bowl. And I don't know if that's just a little pessimism, but
no, I think the Vikings have better ownership and are willing to do pretty much anything. And it seems that our owner for the Wild wants to be a little too involved.
Well, how about just simple math, fellas? Because you look at it and you can say the Super Bowl because both are fairly similar, and even that's a little bit preposterous, but they're fairly similar in their competitive level, if you will. They're both good teams, not great. I would argue the Vikings are better, but they're both good, not great. Well, for the Wild to get a Stanley Cup, just think of how many games you have to win.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the Super Bowl, it's hard to say, well, that'll be so much easier because our favorite team hasn't done it. But, let's assume you get a bye, depending upon how they make the playoff format look. You got to win 3 times. You hope you could do it before the Wild have to put together, what would it be, 16 victories? I'll take my odds.
Thing about hockey, though, in the playoffs, it's momentum. And it's tough in football because there's a week between games. But with hockey, when it's just rolling along like that, if all of a sudden you catch magic in a bottle, you can win, 16 out of 25 games and put it on the trophy case.
Yeah, and that's true. I know that. I mean, when Brian was talking earlier about the 1991 North Stars run to the Cup Finals, that was a team that was under 500 that somehow made the playoffs and then went on this crazy run because they got momentum in the second half, and that's was fun to watch. But yeah, you look at other teams, the Los Angeles Kings as an 8 seed, riding Jonathan Quick to a Stanley Cup championship.
Last year's Blues team.
Yeah, last year's Blue team. They were last place in the whole league at Christmas time, and they end up winning the Stanley Cup. So it can happen, I guess. In hockey, you see it a little bit more, where the teams, a wild card team was able to get hot and make a run. Football, it can happen, but it doesn't seem to happen as often, I guess.
Right. And I think part of the points you guys made with some of the underdogs that have gotten it done also fuel the point of how difficult it is, too, because of how many victories have to happen. Because you look at the 90-91 North Stars and what they did and how obviously it's etched in all three of our memories. But what they win? Nothing. Okay, they won the Campbell Conference, if you want to be specific. But did they finish it? No. You look at the Wolves team that even got Topher on the bandwagon and in attendance at the Western Conference Finals. Heck of a run they made. What'd they win? Nothing. The Wild team that ran into J.S. Jaguar. Prior to running into J.S. Jaguar, phenomenal run. What'd they win? Nothing. So again, in football, you're right. It doesn't happen as often, but again, you should only have to win 3 or 4 games to get it done, where you can win a dozen and not get it done in hockey or basketball.
Yeah, that's very true.
But I got to concur with the sadness or anger train. It's tough to beat 98. I think its closest competitor obviously is 09 because I'll forever argue that Viking team was more balanced than 98. Yep. The 98 offense will probably never be repeated, but the 98 defense to me only fed off the fact that the offense was so good and the D-line got to pin their ears back and the secondary got to be ball hawkers because nobody ran a normal offense against you when they were down by 20 most of the time. Yep. 2009, it was To me, it was going to be more fun because I love to trash talk Packer fans, and I had so many lines lined up that Favre comes here for 1 year and gets it done. What did he waste so much of his life in Wisconsin for? I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that have wondered that same question. But it was going to be so easy to talk so much more smack about that team because they were so good on both sides of the ball and they could win whatever way they wanted to. But what takes the edge off of '09 is they lost the NFC title game on the road. At least the theory is you're not supposed to win it if you're the visiting team in that game. Where '98, they were at home, they were playing a very inferior team, and they lost.
Yeah, that's the 2009 game always felt like we're one big play and maybe holding on to the football away from winning. That '98 game, it just felt like, oh man, we're. I mean, from the first snap, we scored quickly, and then it was we scored a little too soon. I wonder if we're going to get a little bit complacent, and it never felt like we were the better team on that day. And against New Orleans, there were parts when it felt like, oh yeah, we're going to run these guys.
Right. The other thing about '98 that still shocks me, even when I put myself through watching it again, is the Vikings were so bomb happy and they did so many things with Carter and Moss and Reed, etc. But Robert Smith was pretty good.
Yep.
And will probably always be my favorite Viking running back. And I know Adrian Peterson and Chuck Foreman fans will disagree with me till the end, but it's not best, it's favorite. Robert Smith was always my favorite. But when Atlanta tightened up that game and the Vikings were going to have to try to run the clock out, they were doing it and doing it fairly well. And it's very easy to pin the game on Gary, and everybody does. But you look at how they set everything up for him, and it's like, oh man, they did a great job of killing the clock. They got it into a very makeable field goal. He's going to make this, and this is going to end. Now, reality should have told me he is going to make this. We're going to be up by 10, but there's still 2 minutes left. How are the Vikings going to blow this?
I was talking to a family member of mine who was, just still, 20 years old or whatever, and said the greatest disappointment for him for the Vikings was Blair Walsh's shank. And I looked at him 3 or 4 times. I'm like, what? That's not even like second all-time Viking painful memories. It might not be in the top 5. But for the kid that young, I suppose it could be disheartening.
Right. To me, it's a little bit like, I'll think of our very own Sam Fryer, who, loves sports to the same degree that we do. But, we tease Topher for being younger than us. He's not that much younger than me. I'm not that much younger than you, Dave, really, in the reality of things. And then you look at Sam and you go, well, he's not that much younger than us, but it depends. It's like, to put it in normal life, it's like saying, well, an 11-year-old is much younger than an 18-year-old. True. But a 32-year-old and a 25-year-old may not have as many differences. A 42 and 49-year-old don't. You get it. But the margin is the same. But you look at Sam and, his Twitter profile says, hardcore Twins fan since 1995. And I think of 1995 and I go, oh, well, you don't know anything about anything then. Because his heartbreak is all Yankee series, basically. But then I feel worse for him because where's his joy? Because if you weren't here for 87 and 91, I mean, game 163 is on an incredible pedestal for you. Or A.J. Przinsky's home run in Oakland. But I think he would have only been 6 or 7, unless he's a huge sports nerd like me and remembers it like yesterday at the age of 7. Where's his joy kind of thing?
Well, yeah. It's interesting, Brian, that you say that because when we talk about individual players, right? We just got done with numbers and the like Bob Feller. I never saw, but my dad did, and he would probably argue till he's blue in the face that Bob Feller's the greatest number 19 of all time. You and I talk about Steve Carlton. I remember seeing Steve Carlton when that slider was the greatest pitch of all time. You remember seeing Steve Carlton fumble his way through 1987.
I do.
So I do think that generations, if they can have conversations instead of arguing, and I suppose in sports those are the same things, but we get a chance to see players throughout time and how they, are super on top of the game, and then somebody else remembers them on the downslide. So we get to have those kind of conversations.
Yeah, and a little bit too about we're talking about games that bring a lot of disappointment to us and things like that. Football, I think, jumps to the top of the list just because of the fact you were talking earlier. It's a one and done scenario for the most part in the professional ranks. Where in the other sports, when you're playing a series, you can be disappointed over an entire series, but it's harder to have everything riding on one game unless you get to a game 7 scenario where it turns into that. And so I don't know. While you guys were talking, about the '98 team, I was trying to think of some other, series, and even like we talked about the '03 Wild that went to the Western Conference Finals. They ran into JSG Gare. I was disappointed, but it was such a fun run to get there. I was still happy with, and they were so unexpected. I was still happy with just getting there, I guess. But then when I think about the Wild, their series against the St. Louis Blues a couple years ago,
Right.
and how
We
they
made
should
Jake
have
Allen
absolutely
into Ken Dryden.
dominated.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should have dominated that series, and they didn't, and that was so frustrating and so disappointing.
Yep.
That probably the worst one. I mean, for me, for hockey, for professional hockey, I should say, and then baseball. I mean, the Twins, obviously, the 2 World Series championships. And in my lifetime, they've never lost a World Series, so that's pretty cool. But for me, the '02 series against the Angels, for some reason, sticks out as being pretty disappointing.
Yeah, the '92 team, which Brian and I argue all the time, was the best Twins team until this last year that we've seen. But they did nothing, right? Talent-wise, they were fantastic, but they just didn't bubble to the top.
Well, and I think the biggest thing, the point that Topher makes is so valid with football being a one and done, because you don't see the writing on the wall kind of thing. Because with these series, as Topher alluded to, unless it's game 7 where it's winner take all, and again, generationally, this whole thing ties together because, we mentioned Sam being younger than us. Dave, if you talk to your dad, or, God help me, if I still had the ability to talk to mine, I bet you the disappointment of 1965 game 7 would stick out for them. We've only heard about it. But, you talk about the Wild and their runs ending. Well, if they were down 3-1 or even 3-2 in the game that they lost, and I'm not talking about score, I'm talking about series. If you're in game 5 down 3-1 and the series ends, you go, wow. If they would have won tonight, they probably would have lost in 2 days. And, that's a pessimistic point of view. But when you're down, it's kind of like, wow, did I really expect this to end? And Topher made another great point that because the playoff runs are so long in NBA and NHL, just as I talked about why it's so hard to win it, because you got to win so many times, there is the easy way to think back of how great it was and how much fun it was to get here. Whereas, when the Vikes got embarrassed by the Niners this year, we could look back and say, well, a week ago we did what we weren't supposed to do in New Orleans, and that's pretty neat. And some of us can do that, and maybe you can do it for a few days, but it didn't take long for the Twitter trolls to be like, well, but Kirk Cousins is still such a mammoth underachiever. And I don't want to get into that topic, but football is harder to look back and say, well, it was a pretty good season. It's one of those where you don't really want to hear that. And I also think it depends on expectation. I think of the Hermantown Hawks, where Topher and I covered them to the very end. Tremendous season, tremendous individual achievements, great run, but they're almost expected annually. I don't care what the seeding say, at least up here, they're expected annually to just go win it. And so every time they don't, I don't know how much they buy into great season anyway. It to me still feels probably like unfinished business.
Oh, I 100% agree with this. And this is coming from, a person that's followed Duluth Marshall over their last 15 years, 20 years, 21 years. That, we had some really, really good teams, and we're just never able to close the deal. And so you look back at those teams and you say, oh, that was a lot of fun. But what you remember is losing to Hermantown 2-1 when you should have probably walked them off the ice that night. But that's what you remember. You were talking about the '65 World Series, and it would be very interesting to hear your dad and my dad talk, because Dad is disappointed, but what he remembers is Sandy Koufax. I mean, he remembers getting beat by a guy. Sure, there were other things involved, but that guy was, out of his mind. It's like Bob Gibson, won one for the Cardinals. So I wonder if it's easier when you get beat by an outstanding series by all-time legend. Do you know what I mean? If the Vikings beat Atlanta, would it be easy for Atlanta to say, yeah, well, we got walked off by Randy Moss? You know what I mean?
Yes. And it'd be just as easy to say, the Vikings were probably supposed to play San Francisco instead. I believe it. Atlanta pulled a mini upset to even get to that game. Yeah. So maybe it was, the Vikings did well because they got a more inferior opponent than they should have. Similar to what they could say about Denver, because there are people that still say, well, the Broncos would have struggled with Minnesota's offense and maybe not won that Super Bowl. I don't know if I buy it or not because you're putting the Vikings in the Super Bowl. What does history tell me? But
Right.
there is reason to wonder. That's another topic we've had back in the archives of this show. We've talked about the best matchups that never were. Another thing that I'd also like to talk to your dad about, Dave, would be again expectation, and these were legends too. But the '69 and '70 Twins were great teams. And
Yep.
then here comes Baltimore and just goes Yankees on the bid on them. Just says you guys have no chance, pats them on the head and moves on. How did that sit with that group? I think there's a feeling currently that the Twins don't compare to the Yankees. End of story. So when we lose, we go, oh, what else is new? I don't know, and I don't know because I was still 10 years in the making, but that the Twins felt that, oh, well, Baltimore is going to be a real problem for us. I think some Twins fans thought the Twins were going to run roughshod through those groups, and we know how good the pitching staffs were for the Orioles in that era.
Well,
Topher and I were friends with one of them.
I suspect there is somebody screaming at the TV or at the YouTube account right now, hopefully at the radio station's website pretty quick, about the 68 Twins. Because that 68 Twins was a monster team, and they got knocked out in the last minute deal by the Red Sox. That was Yastrzemski's Triple Crown year. But the Twins were the real deal that year as well. And, to get knocked out by an inferior team who got hot at the right time.
And I think you bring up an interesting point too in talking generationally too, because I mean, so many more teams even make the playoffs now and are able to go on those longer runs. Wild
Yep.
card teams are able to do that. Back then, there was no such thing. I mean, you had to win the league during the regular season or win your half of the division, and you're in the league championship series right away. I mean, it's hard to tell. And so there's a lot of great teams that never had a chance to go on a miracle run in the playoffs.
Yeah, yeah.
Think about the Kansas City Royals of just a handful of years ago, making back-to-back World Series, winning one, losing one. Back in the day, they may not have been part of it. But then there's also the counter argument. I'll segue into the last segment, if you will, of this first hour. We never touched on the happiness part of sports. We've been on the depression train for too long. For me, the happiness is always going to be the first one. Now, there are lots of things that my team of choice has won. I could go Duluth East Athletics for days. UMD in the last few years, certainly. The Twins obviously have the 2 world championships. I'm going to start there. The 91 series was better, far more memorable, iconic players, what have you. But in 1987, I was 8, and I had just gotten into sports, and nobody that I would root for had won anything. And for the Twins to beat the Cardinals in 7, and for the entire state and region to just Prince partied like it was 1999. We did it first, partying like it was 1987. I didn't have to go to school the days that the parade was held because my parents wanted me to watch it and be part of it. I'll never forget that happiness. But then you look where I was going with this off the teams that don't make the playoffs then versus now. You look at the 1987 American League standings, not the West, not the East, the American League standings. The Twins would have been 5th in the American League East. I pulled the Super Bowl card on the Brewers, if you will, because Packer fans love to tell Viking fans that they've never won it. So I love to talk to Brewers fans about how many world championships they have. They were 4 or 5 games, maybe even 6 games better. I think it was 6. I think they were 91 and 71. The Brewers were 6 games better than the Twins in 1987 and watched the whole thing from home.
Yeah, that's true. That's where splitting up into divisions certainly does impact. The funny thing about that 87 series is I wasn't going to lose either way. Those are my 2 teams. And so we went and we watched the Herbeck Grand Slam game with my in-laws. And I'm, like Brian in the padded room. I'm in the padded room, whoever's batting, right? My father-in-law looks at me and goes, "Why do you care about this other team?" Where they're all in on the Twins. And I'm like, yeah, but look at who could win if they don't. And
yeah.
We'll see Jack Clark with hosting the World Series trophy, and they just didn't get it right. So that was perfect situation for me when my 2 teams are playing against each other.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And when you talk about 87 and 91, and that's where we get a little bit in the generational thing for me. In 87, I was 3 years old, so 5 years younger than Brian. So I wasn't quite memories aren't quite there. But 91, Brian was 8, and 87, I was 7 and 91, and so that's right in the peak of
Yep.
my sports fandom. And it was I was all in on that 91 team, and it was so cool. And And at that time, I'm like, well, we won in 87, won in 91. We're winning World Series all the time.
I think we're all like that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The dynasty was ready. 2 in 5 years. Let's just keep this trend going.
Exactly. So it
Well, and I
didn't
talked
turn
about
out that way.
right. I talked about 91 earlier being, the personal year that I won't forget, even though I had so many great memories in high school. So many great things happened at the age of 12 in 91. 87, Dave, was a close second because, there was that Twins World Series. But then how many times do you and I point to that Vikings team run too? Those were, weeks apart, months apart.
Yep, 100%. That Vikings team is one of the great. I mean, we talked about a team that got hot that maybe shouldn't have gotten to where they were. That Vikings team is that. Beating New Orleans, that first, that was the Anthony Carter run where he pretty much single-handedly beat New Orleans, and he did single-handedly beat the Niners, and we were a dropped pass from Darren Nelson to go to the Super Bowl that year as well.
Right. If you're watching this on YouTube, as obviously we hope you are, there is actually a YouTube video that says how a drop pass in the 1987 NFC Championship game changed football entirely. And it has more to do with Doug Williams and, the landscape of the black quarterback, if you will, than it does Darren Nelson and the Vikings. But watch it. It's a lot of, 6 degrees of really one play. And it's pretty amazing.
We'll separate, so Duluth people watching in Duluth or from Duluth will be able to time this. So I watched that drop pass from the back of the kitchen at the Plush Pippin downtown.
Ah, nice. Nice. Plush Pippin that later became Orchards, that I think became Applebee's. Now you got me hungry for pie. That's all I know.
Delicious.
All right. So normally on a radio show, we would say when we come back. We certainly hope to come back to radio at some point. But that's about an hour that we've been going. We are going to do today's show in segments. So this will wrap up hour number 1. We'll kind of take a break, decompress a little bit, take a few breaths, hopefully, maybe a beverage. When we come back, we'll do hour number 2. Have some fun. The draft order is set. I'm last again, but it means I get 2 on every turn. We're going to do our all-time Twins team. Should be fun. Northland Sports Page continues. Coming back shortly.